Hello Internet, I'm Jesse, your comrade ferret. When I first got the idea for this channel, I knew I'd get a lot of haters. I figured there'd be a good few anti-communists coming in and taking whatever shot at me that they can. The quality of animation, my garbage recording equipment, my dumb accent, anything, but especially at my fuzziness. I expected, oh my god, it's a communist furry, it's a new fucking low. What I didn't expect was criticism from my target audience. People who say they appreciate my Marxism, but I should get rid of the scary furry model. Or they appreciate the creepy stop motion I've got going on, but maybe I should tone it down with the politics, you know? Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I am. And I'm going to tell you why. A couple months ago, I had a conversation with a friend of mine that stuck with me, and I knew I wanted to do a video on it sometime. Her thesis was, in short, to be anti-furry is a cover or a dog whistle for being homophobic. Now, furries have existed for a long time. People have been calling themselves furry fans since the 1980s. Then we got the internet. We got together in larger communities. We took up the notion of not just appreciating, but in some facet, sort of being these weird creatures that have been drawn and sculpted by human beings around the world since time immemorial. And thus we started calling ourselves furries and not just fans of them. And then came the problems that we're going to be discussing. In the early 2000s, internet culture as we know it was arriving, with its large communities like Something Awful and 4chan, things like image boards and Photobucket that let you share pics and therefore quick visual jokes. Around this time, The God Delusion was released, and all these angsty internet goers absolutely adored Richard Dawkins, so they decided to call these visual jokes memes. And at precisely this time, you've got this suddenly very visual large community of people who say they are, for all intents and purposes, anthropomorphic animals. So I'll give you one guess as to who these memes wound up largely targeting. Now, we can look at this brief historical analysis. I think we can all look at this and say, well, yeah, we were kids. Kids are bullies, and kids bully people who are different from them. However, the years went by. The furries grew up. We didn't really stop being furries. You know, fandoms come and go, but being a furry, weirdly, is sort of like an identity thing. So even as we grew up and the community morphed from this infamously drama-ridden heckhole into something honestly pretty chill, mature, and open, the parts of the internet that hated us the most morphed into, well, yeah. And suddenly the fun poking seems like it might take another look. Perhaps it was just childish bullying, but perhaps there's more to it. We have a so-called fandom that seems to be ingrained into somebody's identity, and we have a group that despises this fandom in particular, who then went on to form the most visible fascist group in the world currently active. Let's have a look at demographics. These early online communities, like 4chan, are hard to measure, but appeared overwhelmingly to be young, straight, white men, often new atheists. Furries were equally AMAB and white, but had and still have a very high population of individuals in the LGBT community. Okay, it's time. Time to get all psychosocial on y'all. When you are a member of a marginalized group that is neurologically defined, including non-heteronormative genders and sexualities, as well as mental disorders and disabilities, a common response is self-hatred. You feel that you should be able to be different because society is telling you to be, and your brain responds to the distress, particularly the memory and emotional networks within the medial temporal lobe, including the amygdala and the hippocampus, which are respectively where we see emotional and memory abnormalities in these individuals. These structures are also implicated in the experience of dissociation, which is the experienced feeling of being separate from oneself. I've got a link down there on the neurology of dissociation if anybody is interested. Long story short, LGBT folks and other marginalized individuals often dissociate as a response to their marginalization. And when there is an enormous online fandom right there for you that not only accepts but encourages the process of becoming someone, something that is simultaneously you, but also far removed from anything you actually are, it makes a whole lot of sense that this community would have a large number of LGBT and neurodivergent individuals within it. It also suddenly makes a whole lot more sense why fascists would despise it, try to infiltrate it as they have, and failing that, paint a target. Furries, as many fandoms, being comprised of many people who feel alienated and are looking for answers, are easy prey for extreme right-wing influencers. That's actually a big part of why I made this channel, to spread awareness about this tactic and counter those influencers. Today, it's less okay in the English-speaking world to hate gay people. It's becoming less okay in the English-speaking world to hate transgender and non-binary people. It's still very much okay to hate furries. It's okay to think they're weird, to say we don't understand them, but hey, this weird non-binary ferret is here to tell you it's not. It's not okay. You can't say you don't understand us anymore because unless I've done an absolutely horrible job so far with this video, now you do. It's not okay to say we're weird, and it's certainly not okay to hate us, because we're just trying to get through life in this crappy ball of anxieties our brains have been molded into by the resentment and failed expectations of society. We, and many other subcultures too, are the visible representation of the marginalized groups that you tweet in neoliberal performative support for. So the next time you see someone, maybe even a friend, bitching about weird-ass furries, I don't know, tell them to stop or something. It's just one of the many sneaky ways that the hateful side of our society expresses its hate, in this case of the LGBT and neurodivergent communities, and worse, packages that hate in a way that seems okay for the blissfully unaware masses to use as well. So, what's this got to do with communism? Well, if you're a socialist of any kind, you already know the answer to this question. Socialism has, since it first began being called socialism in the early years of the 19th century, always championed the rights of marginalized people. Charles Fourier, one of the founders of utopian socialism, coined the term feminism in 1837. Yes, it was a man who did it. He was also an advocate of phalansteries, socialist communities which, among other things, emphasized the rights and freedoms of sexual minorities. Likewise, the Russian Revolution began with a Women's March in March of that same year, and when the Bolsheviks took over, one of the first Tsarist laws removed instantly from effect was the law against homosexuality, making Russia the first nation in the 20th century to decriminalize homosexuality. Policy advisors under Lenin stated that Soviet laws should be interested in science over ambiguous quote-unquote crimes against nature. In both 1923 and 1925, Dr. Grigory Batkus, director of the Institute for Social Hygiene in Moscow, published a report, The Sexual Revolution in Russia, which stated that homosexuality was, quote-unquote, perfectly natural and should be legally and socially respected. And so homosexuality remained legal in the Soviet Union until Stalin, incidentally the very same year he came into power, added an article of law explicitly and specifically banning male homosexual intercourse. Thomas Sankara, founder of Burkina Faso, who's definitely getting a video soon, was a tireless champion of women's rights that makes Justin Trudeau look like a damn chauvinist. Cuba has had a bit of a rough history, to say the least, but today the government is pushing for the legalization of gay marriage despite heavy opposition from the church, and is a world leader today in sexual reassignment surgery. I actually really wish I could go for that. Miguel Diaz-Canel, if you're watching this, you should sponsor me because I totally simp. But anyway, you get my point. Whether you're talking about socialist theorists or modern governments striving for socialism, we tend to be talking about sexual and gender liberation. There's a reason such a high proportion of our talking heads are transgender or non-binary. And this explains as well why whenever I bring up my channel in a group of furries, there's always one or two of them that get very excited. They think they're alone in having these ideas about society, in wanting things to be better, and previously they just haven't had an avenue to realize it, let alone discuss it. And that's why, comrades, my channel is the way it is. This channel, it isn't for you. Not really. Like, yeah, if you like what I've got to say, that's awesome. And if you don't like the fact that I'm a ferret, I don't really care, because you're fine. You're already here. I want to help along members of the subculture of marginalized folks, people who've just had it really rough and might even have dabbled in the other side a bit in hopes that it would make things better, to inform them that there is a better way that they've known all along. All they needed was to name it, and to know that they aren't by far alone. It isn't weird to be a communist furry. It's the most natural thing in this weird, bloody world we've got to live in. And as for the tiny handful of anti-communist furries I've run into, you're okay. Like, it isn't really your fault. We live in a society, and a rather anti-communist one at that. But I hope maybe I can help you come to understand why there's so many of us on the left. You're my brothers, sisters, siblings in degeneracy. And whether or not you agree with my politics are for you. Just be careful out there, alright? The bad guys are everywhere, and it's easy to wind up pitching for them without even realizing it. Keep being the surreal, confusing perverts you are, and take care of each other, okay? Bye now.